I like banging the gavel. It's still good afternoon, I believe. I don't think we quite made it to 6 yet. Good afternoon. My name is Kenneth Kennedy, and I am the chairman of the Operations Management and Budget Committee. This is my third stint as chair of OMB. And clearly the council president is very happy that it's duties he no longer has to perform. And we're certainly happy to do that. This is the financial overview for the city's finances. This is the OMB departmental hearings. This is the first night of hearings. We will go through, I believe, through May 14th, excuse me, for our department hearings. And if we need to take some additional days during the time frame to make sure all questions are answered, we will do so. Let me introduce the council members who are here this evening. To my far right is Councilman Kyle Anderson. To his left, again, my right, is Councilman David McDonald. To my right, and sitting in a chair which I'm very familiar with, is Council President Sean Wooden. To my far left is Councilman Dr. Larry Deutsch. To his right, my left, is Councilwoman Cynthia Jennings, and to my immediate left is Minority Leader Joel Cruz. I believe the Chief Operating Officer wants to start us off, and the first department up was Management and Budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Council and City of Hartford. It's a pleasure to kick off the 2016 Budget Development Departmental hearings. We are working our way through preparing presentations for each department as has been scheduled by Council, starting with tonight's financial overview. As was mentioned last night, the development of the Mayor's recommended fiscal 2016 budget was very challenging, but over the next 14 days, we are going to make ourselves available to answer any and all questions that Council may have related to the FY16 recommended budget. And thank you for the opportunity, and I guess with that I'll turn it over to Mr. Sanchez for the budget presentation.
Good afternoon, council members. As Councilman Kennedy said, today is the first of 5 council hearings regarding the fiscal year 2016 Mayor's recommended budget. This is my 4th year of preparing the budget for the City of Hartford, and I can tell you that this year the department heads have been very attentive and have delivered the required information on time. The Mayor, COO, and CFO have all contributed significantly in the preparation and balancing of this budget, and that my office has worked tirelessly on bringing this budget to where it is today. My job is to compile the budget, track it throughout the year, analyze risks and opportunities, and look at business practices to improve productivity and provide value to the city. I believe, based on my experience and the data available, that the City of Hartford will grow and prosper in the upcoming years. Downtown North will indeed be a catalyst of economic growth. Demographic trends suggest a revival for the inner cities, and Hartford is well positioned to take advantage of these trends. And although it has not been easy balancing the budget for the past 4 years, I look forward to hearing the much-awaited ideas coming from the restructuring task force, which is expected to greatly assist in the long-term financial sustainability of the city. At the departmental level, there is very little change financially in the fiscal year 2016 recommended budget when compared to the fiscal year 2015 adopted budget. Departmental expenses are up only $487,000 or 0.4%. The major drivers in balancing this year's budget are the restructuring of debt, the utilization of a health fund reserve, and departmental reductions. Regarding the utilization of the health fund reserve, Council should note that the administration is currently and actively working with the Hartford Public Schools to ensure that a fully funded OPEB trust is created and that the city is in the process of assisting the BOE in mitigating any potential budget variances for both fiscal year 2015 and 2016. The mayor's recommended budget maintains staffing levels essentially flat in fiscal year 2016 versus fiscal year 2015. FTE count for fiscal year 2016 is 1,406.9 FTEs, down 10 versus fiscal year 2015 adopted budget. Police and fire department headcounts are declining. This will save on payroll expenses, but it will cost in overtime. Preliminary review of the data is showing that the police overtime is being better managed, and that a recent study conducted jointly between my office and the fire department is showing that at the current staffing levels for the fire department, paying for overtime is cheaper than hiring new firefighters. The slide being presented currently shows the changes between the mayor's recommended fiscal year 2016 budget and the council's adopted fiscal year 2015 budget. As you can see, and I will put my glasses to see, on the revenue side, we are showing an $18+ million reduction. After my presentation, the finance department will present their budget and they will get deeper into the revenue numbers. On the expense side, payroll is up marginally, mostly associated with contractual obligations. Pension is down somewhat. We are actually seeing a lower MERV contribution in fiscal year 2016 than in 2015. That's the first time in the last 6 years that that has happened. Other benefits are down significantly, and that is primarily the result of utilizing the funds in the health trust, excuse me, not the health trust, the health fund. Other expenses, as you can see up there, are relatively flat and are mostly departmental-oriented expenses. Moving to the Office of Management, Budgeting, Grants, our mission is financial forecasting, budget development, and financial control, operational analysis, and grants management. The screen up at the top here now shows what our organization looks like. It's broken out into two major areas, the budget area and the grants area. On the expense side, the general fund expenditures are just shy of $800,000 and is expected to grow $12,000 or 1.2%. On the grant side, expenses likewise are just under $800,000 and it's expected to grow only 0.9%. At the general fund level, we are broken out into three divisions: the administration, budget development and control, and the grants administration, all growing very modestly with the exception of the grants administration, and that reduction is due primarily to a smaller amount for part-time pay. Grant volume citywide for 2014, 15, and 16 is showing continued growth. On-call grant writers have produced over the last 2.5 years $12.267 million. We have applied for close to $27 million, and the cost of the grant writers has only been $113,000, or less than 1% of the amount awarded. It's a good investment. The office legal mandates include budget development and controls, financial forecasting, operational analysis, and grant management services, which include community development grants, emergency shelters grant, housing for persons with AIDS, and other grants. Strategic goals that we achieved this year include the awarding of the GFOA Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. We have successfully applied for over $30 million in competitive grants. We have implemented several new systems this year, including a web-based payroll budgeting system, grants reporting system, and Munis position control. We have conducted comprehensive analysis of fire overtime, supported the people's budget, and completed the BOE in-kind report. And we have successfully completed our routine 3-year cycle internal audit of the grants division. The strategic initiatives for next year include the reorganizing of the department to improve efficiency and output, conduct analysis of health and prescription drug expenses, implement phase 2 of the payroll budgeting system to improve reporting, forecasting of MRF or pension contribution and health expenses, soliciting new and recurring competitive grants, reviewing of operating expenses, including gasoline and diesel fuel, and spray pool water consumption. We are also looking to continuing to monitor the internal audit open report items and maximize grant funding to offset general fund expenditures. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to open up for questions from the Council President and then follow accordingly to Councilman Cruz, Minority Leader. Council President.
I had a question with respect to the grants function, and are you proposing an increase in expenditures for grant writers?
No.
Should you be? And
we budget approximately $60,000 a year for grant writers, and for the last 2 years we haven't spent the full amount, so we don't expect that we need extra funding for that.
okay, thank you.
Councilman Cruz.
Thank you, through the chair. My first question is from the book 2020-1. At the beginning on significant features, it says the net increase is a result of analysis services from a graduate level student. Could you share target areas of what that analysis will be?
Yes. Beginning next August, we have made a proposal to a UConn graduate student in the government area. The proposal is going out to a Hartford resident, and we haven't fully defined all the objectives that we have for that intern, but they will help in a variety of areas. Jeff, do you want to make any comment on that?
Hi, thanks, Jose. The intern will actually work with a number that were in the presentation, including the intern will actually work with a number of the list that was in the presentation for the analysis. working on the health analysis, supporting that, also supporting the position management application.
I have a, on your presentation, from the recommended budget of grant volume citywide, there's an increase, and I wanted to know whether we could, whether a detailed list of where the increase is originated from, perhaps looking at all our assets, but then where's the increases coming from, the additional?
Sue, do you wanna-
Thank you. And my last question through the chair, it's in regards to our grants. So I know, based on fiscal year 2012, we were at 10 million. We adopted 20 million, and we're projecting another 20 million in grants. And so I know that grants have been established and are well received. We also know that grants come and go, and so they never provide consistency throughout the city. Have we looked into ways of revenue that we don't rely so much or so heavily on grants?
Well, there's a particular amount of grants that are
If you don't mind, so
There's a
just to
seat.
the microphone. Thank you, sorry about that.
Thanks. Sorry about that. Yeah, there's actually about 80% of the grants the city does receive are entitlement in nature, which means that we'll get them year after year because of some factor in the city. Thanks. Because of the population, or because of our housing stock, or because of the poverty level, or just because. And those grants fill a lot of positions, and they provide a lot of the essential services, like you'll hear about the homeless and the HIV/AIDS programs, the elderly programs, et cetera. And those are pretty steady revenue streams. The only thing that would make a very serious cut would be if one of those programs were eliminated in the federal or the statewide. So, you know, there's like a good 80% chance, 80% of these things are covered and have been covered for the past 20 years and are relatively expected to continue on their course. The other 20% of the grants that we get that are competitive, that we have to apply for, we may not get, those are the ones that are really the ones that you're talking about, where you may get a grant that supports an initiative, it may fund a program for 5 years, and then what happens? A lot of effort is put into, once we get a grant in that area, is to not stop searching for a grant in that area, is to look for complementary grants to pick that up. We've done that with like the teen pregnancy grant. Just because we got it didn't mean that HHS stopped looking for teen pregnancy grants. You have to keep going. And then when it's getting close to running out, you reapply year after year. The other thing that we're trying to do, and this is starting on a very small level, but we're trying to look more closely at private foundations and organizations and businesses. And we've gotten a pretty good start this year, albeit on a small level. But we've attracted, through a national organization, the Parks and Recreation Association, has attracted support from Disney, ABC, and ESPN to bring some private dollars in here to support our parks and recreation. So that's kind of the area that we really are trying to focus more concentration on, because that might be a little bit more reliable than the grants. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Councilman Deutsch.
Thank you, and through the chair, I apologize if this detailed question has already been answered. I had to step out for a minute. But in terms of grants, as a follow-up to Councilman Cruz's question, there's been some discussion in the past of either a merger or an association between Finance Department and Management Budget, and some citizens indicate that we as a city may receive certain grants, but the question is, how well monitored are the expenditures in accordance with the terms of the grant, which may have originated in another department. The grant may have been written and given to them. So can you give for all of us a general way that one makes sure that the grant is in accordance with the terms of the grant in terms of the expenditures?
Sure.
Actually?
Well, what our office does is provide support to write the grants for any department that wants to get a grant. But it is the department head's responsibility and the department head staff to make sure that when they do get a grant, they have the qualified people that are able to manage the grant, carry out the services of the grant, and also to manage the financial aspects of it. For example, I'll just keep using teen pregnancy because we've brought it up. You know, the Health and Human Service Department has a very qualified staff that can take care of the services that are needed. They also have a very strong financial and administrative staff, and they have the relationships with the funders. Each grant program may have a different funder with specific guidelines to fund, and most of the ones that I'm familiar with, you have to give there's quarterly reporting and things. Most of the funds you do not get unless their funds are on a reimbursement basis. So things have to be monitored and done properly before you can get funded. And I think the city can kind of speak to that success because we don't have grant funds that are held up or not given to the city for non-performance. So I think that speaks very well. But each department, because of the expertise of each department, needs to be responsible for that part of their grant, for actually monitoring, ensuring that all the objectives of the grant and all the requirements of the grant are fully realized. And they get support from our office and from the finance department, for example, to run a quarterly budget, to make sure the numbers match or anything else they need. But the things they do with their agencies in the community, teen pregnancy, getting a list of, how many did what and what are the increases or decreases, that's all monitored by the professional staff in each department for the grants. You're welcome.
Any other questions from members of the council? We are joined to my right by Councilman Raul DeJesus Jr. I have a budget question, and I'd like to make a time, Jose, to sit down and try to go through the fringe benefit portion of the Board of Education's budget. Since OPED is kind of the other employee benefits and how that expense is used, I'd like to be better briefed on that, and probably the entire council, in terms of how that is a part of their budget at some point in time, and we can certainly do that. We don't have to do that here. Okay, thank you very much. Up next is Finance Department. We'll take a break for television so they can, we're going to stay right here, but so they can cut it up, because I know they will keep running this during the course of the next couple of weeks. And then finance people, come on down. Yeah, it's commercial break.
Maybe right back here in case they ask something good. Dominic, how are you?
You gonna stay here too, Jose?
Down.
Yes, sir.
You're picking up at the.
Did you change any?
You're picking up at the revenue.
Yeah. Did you leave the responsibility?
I didn't make any changes.
You decided to leave that in?
I never told you anything about any of the changes.
I believe we're now in the evening time of April 30th. For purposes of television, this is now going to be the Finance Department's presentation to the council. And gentlemen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Darrell Hill. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for the city. Our Acting Finance Director, Ms. Rawls, is unable to be with us tonight. So I will lead the finance presentation. To my right is our Revenue Manager, Dominic Greco. My immediate left is John Phillip, the City Assessor, and on his left is the City Tax Collector, Mr. Mark Nelson. As I'm sure you're aware, the financial integrity of the department of the city is managed through the Finance Department, including adequate due diligence and proper internal controls. The main responsibility of the Finance Department is financial accounting and reporting, as well as assessment and collection of taxes. that primarily focuses on Mr. Phillip and Mr. Nelson to my left, but revenue citywide is tracked through Mr. Greco to my right. We not only provide services to our internal customers, but also our external customers, the residents of our great city. On the next slide, the Department of Finance is broken down into 5 divisions. The administration, which is the director's office, accounting and control, some refer to accounting and control as accounting and financial reporting. That's where our pre-audit, payroll, and accounting functions are. And as I've spoken to already, our revenue manager, tax assessment, or tax assessor, and tax collection. The next slide shows the org chart, if you will, and it's rather large and complicated with one box for controller that swings around the left side and is the bottom half of the page. But the 5 divisions previously mentioned, administration, accounting and control, revenue management, tax assessment, and tax collector, are their own discrete divisions that are responsible for their respective functions. And as you can see, the controller and the tax collector are the 2 largest divisions within the department, but not by any means diminishing the work of the assessor and the revenue manager. There is an executive assistant and deputy finance director in the department. Both of those are currently vacant. And while our controller is acting finance director, Mr. Ray Singh behind me is acting as our acting controller, as that responsibility is critically important to the financial aspects of the city. On the following slide is an overview of the FY16 General Fund recommended budget, broken down by division. Working from top to bottom, you'll see that there are slight additions and reductions to each division, the largest of which are the reduction for accounting and control, which is primarily based on the charging of 2 employees to grants, as well as the transferring or completion of a transfer of a position to the treasurer's office. And the largest positive is within tax assessment. We have a revaluation coming up. This $300,000 is the first step of it. There will be a like or actually larger amount in 2017.
This is the larger.
Okay. This is the large amount for the revaluation that will get underway in 2016. All of those net down to a departmental-wide increase of just under $200,000. Again, with the vast majority of it being due to the revaluation. The next slide shows the portion of the administrative expenses in the finance department that are charged to grants and CIP. The numbers speak for themselves at just under $190,000 and just over $90,000. I believe council is familiar with the portion of employees that are charged to the capital improvements program. That's in collaboration, coordination with not only Corp Counsel, but our external bond counsel, as well as our external auditors. Simply said, those employees that are charged to the capital improvements program are supporting the capital improvement programs itself or the infrastructure that the capital improvement program funds. The following slide shows the legal mandates. As I've spoken to previously, they revolve around not only the accounting and reporting requirements of the city, including all federal and state single audits, the annual, comprehensive annual financial report, and all regulatory reports and filings, including those that are required by either the charter or the code to be submitted to the mayor and city council. Finance Department is also responsible for the revenue budget and the annual capital improvements program. The capital improvements program is not just the developing of the multi-year CIP, but also includes the management of the city's debt obligations or any borrowings in coordination with the Treasurer's Office and, of course, under the leadership of the Mayor's Office, particularly for general obligation bond issues. The Finance Department is responsible for the entire financial reporting software system, which includes our Munis system. This year, we have converted our tax assessment and tax collection from Munis to what is called Quality Data Services. We refer to it as QDS, which has improved the abilities of the tax office for reporting the tax collections, as well as it being financed, the risk management aspects of the city. One of the things that's incorporated in the mayor's recommended 2016 budget is the addition of a risk manager at the city. Currently, the city shares a risk manager with the Board of Education. The addition of a risk manager is to have someone that is solely focused on the risk and rewards of the city's operation. That's not with any intended or implied disrespect to the joint position that the city and the Board of Education have operated under recently, but given the health benefits, insurance, OPEB, and other risk management, including all of our insurances, even those that are self-managed, we believe that a risk manager would add great value to the city for what is the expense is only the incremental difference between what we are currently paying. Throughout the year, the department has achieved a variety of accomplishments and successes. Once again, we've received the Governmental Finance Officers Association Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. We have made enhancements to our tax bills and online payment services. Given the year-over-year financial challenges, not only managing the annual budget once adopted by council, but including the development of the following year's recommended budget up and through its implementation, the department led the effort in creating the Revenue Opportunities Committee that Mr. Greco will speak to in a few minutes. But we've also improved some of our internal policies regarding travel and city vehicles. Going forward, the department will be intimately involved in a variety of efforts beyond what I refer to as the day job of the financial accounting, reporting, and tax collection of the city. But with the pending ordinance in front of council to amend the existing other post-employee benefits trust and the actual creation of that trust, which will be led by the Pension Commission, the Finance Department has been providing assistance not only to the Treasurer's Office and the Pension Commission, but also the Board of Education in that regard. In 2016, we will be performing personal property audits, and as you may have seen recently in the media, improving our improper motor vehicle registration to improve our tax collections related to vehicles. Beginning on October 1, 2016, the grand list revaluation, as well as increased focus on delinquent tax revenue collections. Of course, with continued to provide assistance to our seniors by implementing continuing the elderly tax credit program with quarterly billing beginning July 1, 2015. And the last bullet references our time and attendance software that increases our accountability and payroll processing perspective. Running through those quickly, I'll ask Mr. Greco to speak to our recommended revenue budget.
Thank you, Darrell. Good evening, everybody. The next slide on the next page speaks to the major drivers in the mayor's recommended budget for next fiscal year. This year's budget is currently at 552. The mayor's recommended budget for next fiscal year is approximately 533.8. This slide will speak to the major drivers. In terms of increases, there is approximately a $6.6 million increase in property tax revenue, which was primarily driven by the growth of approximately 2.5% in the grand list. In terms of decreases, we have a decrease of approximately $4.9 million, which is driven by the decrease in state municipal aid, which was proposed by the governor. We have a decrease of $16 million in other financing sources, which is made up of $14.4 million for the sale of the Church Street garage. We also are not budgeting for bond premium on the revenue side for next fiscal year. This is now being budgeted as a reduction to debt service expense. And our last decrease is in the reimbursement section of the revenues. Reimbursements are no longer budgeted as a revenue, but are being treated as a reduction to health insurance expense.
If I may, while you're on that page, the 4.9 decrease in, is from the governor's recommended budget. You are aware, right, that the legislature has put those funds back in, I believe, their proposed budget. That's my understanding.
No, the only two things that I'm aware of that the legislator has put back in are two pilots for the housing pilot and the tax abatement program. Everything else has stayed the same.
For you, Mr. Chair, and just because it was my understanding coming out of the Finance Committee in connection with the decrease in the mill rate for autos, right, down to maybe it's 29 mills or something in that neighborhood, that municipalities would be made whole on those lost revenues, so that's even, plus there'd be an additional 12 million for, and I'm not sure if that.
I don't think we've seen any of those numbers yet, Council President. The only thing we've seen are the governor's proposed budget and the changes which were made by the Appropriations Committee, and those figures were released this past Monday, and everything has stayed the same except for those two grants.
Okay, and so I think it was just yesterday, maybe the Finance Committee on the tax side. So I'd encourage you to look at the additional tax revenues.
You're referring
that
to
might be coming
SB1,
in.
I think? I believe.
Yeah, that might be it.
How about we just leave this as a budget question at this point, that go back and look at the increased numbers, what we believe that possibly are increased numbers in revenue. I myself have had conversation with our delegation, who's assured me that that money has been, that 4.9 has been put back in. So I'd like to figure out who's correct on that, and then exactly if that's in fact the case, if it's money we've not accounted for, what are our projections for that, for those funds? And I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation, so go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if I may make a comment. The mayor's recommended budget was built on the governor's submitted budget, which has that in the aggregate $4.9 million decrease in intergovernmental revenues. So all of this presentation and the presentations that you'll see from the administration will be based on that. What is happening as the General Assembly progresses through their long session, and ultimately we won't know what their approved budget is until I believe the first week of June. So yes, we will keep track of that information and we'll provide it as available, but the budget was built with that $4.9 million decrease.
Councilman Deutsch, you had one question off this particular page?
Yes, through you, if you'd like to stay on this page for a moment. Some questions. On the first line, a 6.6 million increase in property tax revenue. Can you tell us what portion may be due to the increase in the grand list, which you mentioned, let's say it's 2.5%, some amount, and what portion of that is due to, let's say, an improved collection rate? If those fall within that line, property tax revenue, can you tell us how that will fall out? And then I have a follow-up to that.
One follow-up to the question. Go ahead.
you take a look at page 6-10 in the recommended budget book.
Sure.
You'll see that the first line, the current year tax levy line, that growth is built into that number.
I think the councilman's question maybe, is it coming from an increase in assessment? Is it just growth in the actual values? What's the reason for the growth other than since there's no mill rate increase? That's a question that's kind of run around to members of the council. If that could just be explained.
I'll let John Phillips speak to the specifics in terms of growth in the personal property taxes.
It is the rise in the grand list was 2.48%, so that is the lion's share of that increase in property tax revenue. Of that, the lion's share of that was a 2.5% increase in residential assessments. That's because that's our law that I'll get into a little more later. There was also an 8% increase in apartment assessments for the very same reason, and there was growth in the personal property portion of the grand list.
Thank you. Your follow-up, Councilman?
Well, yes. Here, once again, the question is still relevant, though. If it's property tax revenue, what fraction of that or estimation is there in an improvement in the tax collection rate as assessed, with current figures? I mean, is there any assumption that the tax collection rate will be boosted? And then there are other questions which will follow later, but what about that? And here, the correlated question.
Councilman Deutsch.
I might as well ask the question that I ask each and every year. If council or finance department were to decide to increase the staffing for tax collection, either with an additional 1 or 2 staff members in the tax department to bring it closer to what it was years ago, or an attorney, would we improve the tax collection rate to make it worthwhile to increase the number of positions in the tax collector's office? Now, I know this is a tricky question, but we ask it each and every year, and it is always a question because citizens ask us, should we have more people in the field working out payment plans and so on, so that we improve the tax collection rate and make worthwhile an extra 1 or 2 staff members? And so you can give an estimate as you wish about whether that's something we should consider.
If I may, if we can give a short answer on that, maybe a more detailed one in writing. I know that's questions to you, Mark, but I think it's a question we all have, and it's a fair question.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the very quick answer, and we can circle back to this, is the increase is driven by essentially 3 things: the growth in the grand list, the growth in the grand levy, which is caused by the assessment ratio shifts, and a very slight increase in the collection rate. The current year levy budget number is essentially a 3-year moving average by charter, and so you don't factor in an increase in your collection rate to get to that 6.6. What I can say very briefly is that in the mayor's budget, we did work very hard to see if we could increase collections by looking at the staff issue that Councilman Deutsch has raised, and there's approximately another $400,000 or $500,000 that's built into the budget that was added because we are looking at adding another position and making some efficiency changes. So, and we can circle back to that later.
Your collection rate, and then Council President Wooden had a question. And again, I'm going to apologize, but this page is very interesting to all of us, which is why we stopped the presentation and asked some questions, and we'll want to get back to your presentation, but I think we've just got some questions for this particular page. The collection rate?
Our current collection rate is just under 95, but Mr. Greco is budgeting on the 3-year moving average, which I think was
94.34.
94.34 for this budget.
Yeah, and just to follow up on the questions regarding the 6.6 million increase, and so that was very helpful. So we have grand list actual growth, we have grand levy, which is the assessment,
Correct.
and we have the collection rate. And so if you could follow up in writing with that breakdown of those percentages that make up that increase, as well as the absolute dollar numbers, and ultimately, because this is very confusing for residents every year when we work really hard not to increase the mill rate, and they still get an increase in their out-of-pocket costs, right? So ultimately, I think for this body, we need to understand what we need to do if our intention is not to increase the out-of-pocket costs for residents, right? Clearly lowering the mill rate, but that's where we need to get to and at least understand that early enough to do something about it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go through the presentation. Let's mark this slide so we can come back to it, and then that way we can answer questions. I don't want to get too bogged down on this particular slide right here. There might be some others that will bring up the same information and will raise the same questions. But I see questions from Councilman DeJesus and Councilman Deutsch. Go to the presentation, and then we'll get back to this.
Oh, so now to really bog things down. So the assessment ratio of which we speak, across the state of Connecticut, I'm sure most of you are aware, assessments are 70% of fair market value. Fair market value for real estate is determined at the time of a 5-year revaluation, and for business personal property and for automobiles, that's present market value. The only two exceptions to that 70% across the state are residential real estate and apartments in Hartford. Apartments are defined as 4 living units or more. Those, and the way we assess real estate in Hartford is regulated by CGS Section 1262R. Right now, this year, for the 2016 budget, the 2014 grand list, the residential assessment ratio rose 2.5% to 30.68, and the apartment ratio rose by 8.33% to 65. Next year, apartments will be 70, and for the foreseeable future, until the law changes, if the law ever changes, the residential assessments will be calculated by the assessor each year. The calculation is a comparison between the annual change in the grand levy compared to CPI. The next slide is a history of where we've been as long as 1262R has been in effect. It actually went into effect in fiscal year 13. Before the 2011 revaluation, the apartment ratio was 37.6% and the residential ratio was 26.17%. The law has the apartment ratio rising by 5 percentage points each year until it reaches 70%, with a big cliff between 2012 and 2013 when it rose to 50% in 13. The residential ratio, for the first 2 years that this law was in effect, became and stayed at 29.2%. Last year it rose 2.5%, and this year it is rising again 2.5%.
The next slide, Daryl spoke to this earlier. During the year, the Revenue Management Division created the Revenue Opportunities Committee. The committee was created for the purpose of identifying and prioritizing ideas for increasing revenue in order to address gaps in this year's budget and future year budgets. The committee consisted of division heads and city employees across all city departments. The committee produced 20 recommendations that were reviewed by the mayor and various city administration during this budget process.
Excuse me, if you could speak up just a little bit.
I'm sorry.
Some of the council people were saying they were having trouble hearing. Thank
The
you.
next slide identifies some of the recommendations which were in the report which was issued by the Revenue Opportunities Committee. The first two recommendations that were produced were to have the assessor office perform personal property audits during next fiscal year. Another recommendation was to go out and hire an outside firm for vehicle registration fraud. This is for individuals who are registering their cars in other states. Items which are in process, which the committee is working with either the department or with Corporation Counsel, are as follows. There was a recommendation that the false alarm ordinance be revised. It's my understanding that Corporation Counsel and EST are working on revising this ordinance. There was a recommendation made for a qualified food operator training ordinance. I believe this ordinance has come before council and was on Monday's agenda. There was also an ordinance proposed to start charging barbershop and beauty salons an annual license fee. Another recommendation which was made was for what is called as a relocation program. This was proposed by Health and Human Services, and the recommendation is that we start billing landlords anytime that there's relocation expenses which the city pays if tenants are displaced because of a fire or code violations and we need to get these people into hotels or whatever. A recommendation is that we start billing the landlords, whereas right now the city is picking up all those fees. There was a recommendation to increase the domestic partnership fee in the town and city clerk's office, as well as to increase the notary seal fee. And the last recommendation was to increase the rooming housing license and licenses and inspections. The next slide pretty much shows the variance in each of the revenue categories. The first line is the general property taxes, which refers to the 6.6 number we were referring to earlier. We have a slight increase in the licenses and permits area for next fiscal year in the recommended budget, about $250,000. That's primarily driven by an increase in the building and trade permit fees. We have a slight decrease in the fines, forfeits, and penalties category, about $41,000. The category that we call the revenue from money and property is going down approximately $400,000, which is due to the decrease in the annual lease payment that we are supposed to receive for the Excel Center. Intergovernmental revenue at this moment in the mayor's recommended budget is decreasing approximately $4.9 million, and those figures are based on the governor's proposed budget. There'll be a slide which we'll speak to later. Oh, it's actually next. Okay. This slide here compares the governor's adopted budget for this fiscal year and what he's proposed for next fiscal year. No change in ECS money, which comes directly to the city. Slight decrease in transportation of about $300,000. Pequot revenue, decrease of about $250,000. The pilot that the city receives for colleges, hospitals, and universities proposed to go down about $2 million. Pilot that we receive for state-owned property going down about $500,000. The next two categories are relatively small. The MRSA, the Municipal Revenue Sharing Account, that money, which is in this year's budget, was money that not only the city but others were shorted back in 2013. The General Assembly decided to put this money in at the end of the year for this fiscal year. Unfortunately, there's been a bill that's been introduced to eliminate funding for this year as well. And the last two line items are the two line items that I spoke to earlier, which the governor had proposed to eliminate, but the Appropriations Committee has now reinstated, which is the pilot that we get for housing and tax abatement from the Department of Housing. So total decrease of about $5.1 million when we're comparing the governor's proposed budget for next fiscal year to this year's adopted budget. We continue on with the charges for services category. A slight increase of about $150,000, which we expect to get from increase in conveyance tax. Reimbursements I spoke to earlier, you will now see that that number has dropped significantly from this year's adopted budget to next year's recommended budget. The reason for that is that we are now budgeting for that as a reduction to health insurance expense and no longer as a revenue. Other revenues are going down approximately $400,000, primarily driven from sale of city property. And the last item, which is the big one, which is about $16 million, is due to Church Street Garage being budgeted in this fiscal year for about $14.4 million, which there is nothing for that obviously next year. Bond premium is now being budgeted as a reduction to debt service, and we have a slight increase of about $1.2 million, which we expect to get from HPA revenue.
Thank you. First up will be Councilman Raul De Jesus Jr. Councilman.
Evening. Thank you, through the chair. So pertaining to the assessment, I see that the assessment appeals have gone down. I guess the ones that are turned in, but actually the appeals that we're losing is about 80%. And that's pretty much the highest it's been probably the past 3 to 4 years. Why are we having that big of a loss there?
We always do, and that's a percentage of everything that was filed and how they've been adjudicated, and so as they're adjudicated, the percentage rises. But essentially, we settle, assessors almost never win outright, and we have hundreds of them. So, you know, if I won outright, we have a trial scheduled in 3 weeks. I'd consider it a win if, you know, our methodology held up. This is kind of an aside, and it's not real estate. But the bottom line is most of these things settle, and it settles a loss because it's, you know, only a handful are withdrawn.
So you're saying based on the settlements, which is about, it's about $480,000 that we've lost, right? You're saying, and this is till date. This estimate, is this an estimate till date right now, or is that number could potentially increase?
The percentage, you know, ultimately it's going to be 100. But
my concern is that I've seen it at 35. It went down in 2003 to 29%. It goes up in 2014 to 40%. In 2015, it goes up to 65%. It stays the same in the projected in 2015, and then it goes all the way up to 80% on 2016. So I see a dramatic increase on that, and that's concerning to me because that is revenue that we're projecting that if we're not collecting, right, it becomes a big problem. I mean, what can we do to better assess these homes? Because it seems 80%, that's pretty high.
Ultimately, it will be 100, and that's why it's gone up. You know, anybody who files suit almost always gets something, and even a little something is a loss, right? If the assessment's reduced, it's a loss. So, I mean, those percentages are misleading because 29 only meant we'd work through 29% of the backlog at that point in time. Now we're almost done. We have very few outstanding. I'm working on a new crop as we speak, but I expect it to be significantly less new ones this year than there were last year and the year before that.
I think we're still kind of right in between with the tax collector in front of us. In lieu of the policy that we put into place to reduce the amount of tax liens that we're selling, we're still seeing an increase in the collection rate. Can you explain how is that happening?
Well, I think to some degree, Councilman, the improving tax collection rate is more a function of the economy than anything else. If you remember when we spoke earlier, for the purposes of the budget, we're looking at a 3-year moving average. 3 or 4 years ago, our taxpayers were still in, and many still are, significant financial distress. But I think what I'm seeing in the tax office is more timely payments. Not necessarily attributed to an increase in our ability to service the debt, but more a function of the economy. Also, I will say that as delinquencies had been growing, they were getting more serious. You know, if you've got 2 or 3 years outstanding, that's obviously, there's a bigger risk of foreclosure. And so as you had those growing delinquencies, you're also moving further in time to the point where taxpayers have to take corrective action because that enforcement is happening. And I guess the bottom line is that enforcement is helping drive up the tax collection rate. As we collect more ourselves, we can continue to decrease and reduce our reliance on lien sales, which has been, I think, a big part of what we've been trying to do over the last 5 years, 4 or 5 years.
So my other question is concerning to the grand list growth. We have a big jump. So we go from $40 million growth, approximately 47 to be exact probably, or to be very exact, 47,621,519 this previous year. This current year we have an 87.669227 increase, so 87,669,227. Can you break that number down as to how much of that is coming from the assessment ratio and what is real growth from there? And how much of it is from the residential rate increase, the commercial rate increase, the apartment rate increase, the residential rate increase, and then what else is the growth?
If you turn to page 6-2 in the discussion of general property taxes, most of those numbers are in there. The bottom line is the lion's share of the change was, in fact, the increase in the ratios of both residential and apartment real estate. There was an increase in personal property assessments that was fairly significant proportionately. It was more than 4%, but it's a smaller portion of the grand list. So again, most of the increase in the grand list was increases in assessment ratios, and in terms of growth for building, there's very little of that because, well, for a number of reasons. But the tax appeals are a drag on the growth in the grand list because one year it's a higher number and the next year we settle at a lower number, and if there's hundreds of them a year, that's some significant headwind.
So it's fair to say that the increase of the grand list or the growth of the grand list is directly linked to the assessment residential rate and to the apartment rate increasing, pretty much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Deutsch, followed by Councilman Anderson.
Thank you, and through the chair. If I may, I'd like directly to follow up on some of the questions that Councilman De Jesus was just raising. In regard to tax lien sales, that we have passed out something that's very short and concise, commentary on tax lien sales, because as we understand it, there's a revenue budget item of $6 million. And the question is, as you see in those in that paragraph that we all have now up here, and all of you, I think, the question that the annual sale of tax liens, it says, this is in a well-known journal, is a dangerous way that municipalities can shore up their finances through sale of tax liens. It points out, I won't read the whole thing, but some of it, that it leads to unintended consequences difficult to manage, and that it basically says the new owners manage their holdings to maximize return, which goes outside the city, rather than a return being kept inside the city, as has been explained to us. Am I correct about the 18% interest and so on? And it may run counter to public interest.
Question.
So therefore, the question is, we have in the budget right now a figure of $6 million revenue, and we've been discussing other means of revenue rather than selling tax liens, which has been a practice over many years, and the promise has been to reduce it significantly, and this reduction is minor. What ways can you think of to, if we reduce the tax lien sale, as this article and others recommended, to only 2.7 million, I think it was, or 2.3 million, the mandatory sale, so that rather than have revenue through tax lien sales, how can we compensate through our local tax collection efforts, get that same money with payment plans, home visits, increased letters, so that we can keep the money here in Hartford? I know this is a perennial question, but each year, am I correct, it comes up, and we've been faced with that issue of revenue through a different method that keeps it local in Hartford instead of outsourcing. Can you comment on that?
Mark, give us some detailed explanations. I know we cleared some of this up with our notice liens through council provision sponsored by Council President Wooden and myself. I think there were some others that were involved in that issue, but if you talk about the change in notices and how this number compares to other fiscal years and that type of thing.
Sure. The short version, Mr. Chairman, is that while this year's budget is a relatively minor decrease, it does continue a 5-year trend of a declining reliance on lien sales. I think the question that comes up each year is, could we collect it ourselves and keep the interest for ourselves, as opposed to, once we've assigned the liens to third parties, they are obviously in the shoes of the municipality and therefore earn the 18%. The answer to that question, quite simply, is that given enough time, we certainly could. But the means by which we sell liens is to recognize the revenue in that fiscal year, which ends June 30th. And so it is not reasonable to say we would collect any more than we are. If our collection rate, for example, is 95, it's 95 in that current fiscal year. And so I think for the purposes of budgeting, it's very difficult to get completely away from lien sales. With that said, some of the changes that we've made here in Hartford take us clearly out of the realm of what this article is saying. Some states around the country allow lien buyers to take the property through certain non-judicial foreclosure actions that don't result in an auction, a public auction. And so there are municipalities in other parts of the country that this applies to. It does not apply to us because our lien sale agreements call for a no foreclosure period, some of them a year, some of them 2 years. And many of the taxpayers whose liens are assigned are able to benefit from longer-term payment plans as a result of our lien assignment. And I think we've talked about that in committee previously. I am an advocate of continuing to downward track on this, but I'm also an advocate of tightening our own internal controls so that we are assigning liens that frankly should be assigned. And the real answer for Hartford, in my opinion, and this is my 7th year as tax collector, is that we employ a hybrid approach where some liens are assigned and some liens are not assigned. And clearly the ones that we would not want to assign are the ones that are on payment plans, where, to Councilman Deutsch's point, we stand to retain that 18%. But if you don't assign any liens, you're not getting the 18% if they're not paid at the end of the day. The lien buyers are taking on the risk of non-payment, which we can't hold ourselves given our budget constraints.
To Councilman Deutsch's point, could you present us with a detailed explanation of what it would take to, maybe not at the end of this fiscal year, but through either next fiscal year, what it would take for you to ramp up and take more of that role in terms of the collection, and how you would hybrid the collection for the council so that we could put that in terms of policy?
I'd be happy to.
And I think that's something we'd be interested in.
And through the chair, we have asked now 4 times in 4 emails for a breakdown of the neighborhoods most impacted, Mr. Nelson. We've asked 4 times in emails circulated to the whole council for a breakdown on what neighborhoods are impacted, which has implications for blight. You can do a sort by neighborhood, by block, by zip code, by NRZ, and we've asked for that, I must say, and it's been promised.
Hey,
This would help us analyze the impact on the
Councilman,
neighborhoods.
excuse me.
Yep.
I'm the chairman, and I was trying to help you with your question. The information that has been gathered, when we initially had the information from the community bank on Franklin, I know they have provided a great deal of that information. I think that is mostly the same information that you're requesting. That information is available. If it is different, then please follow up with a question, okay, through the chair to Mark and his staff, and then we can try to get that cleared up. But I have seen that map, okay, and I think that's pretty much what you're asking for. If it is not, then we can get that information more detailed and don't need to get too bogged in it now, because it's not necessarily a budget question. Formalize it through the process, okay? And I greatly appreciate you allowing me to get the floor back. Councilman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Mr. Greco, I'd like to bring your attention back to the Revenue Opportunities Committee. First of all, I'd like to commend the committee on looking at other ways besides taxation to bring funds to our city. We've been sitting here, I've been sitting here for the last 3 years indicating, looking at additional revenue streams besides taxation. I'm looking forward to reviewing all of the recommendations that you have in progress. I would like to add another one to this list, if you'd be so kind. Looking at multi-dwelling apartment buildings, going back to maybe collecting their trash. And we did that some time ago, but it's my understanding that it's been outsourced to other collection agencies. Maybe we can do a little competitive and may look at how do we reduce maybe the cost since they're going up on taxes. So my recommendation is basically, how can we maybe revisit collecting trash and recyclables at multi-story apartment buildings that might be currently using a private entity. Thank you.
I'm not, to the finance, I mean, if it's not a finance department question and you think it belongs to another department, please say so. If finance can help with that question, then please answer Councilman's question.
I believe the correct department is Public Works, and I do believe they are planning on speaking to it. I think they're scheduled for Monday, not only the trash, but also recycling, particularly at multi-unit dwellings.
If I can, through the city staff that is here, can we have that question prepared for Public Works, so when they are here, they'll be able to answer Councilman Anderson's question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Anderson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm all set. Thank you.
You're all set?
Yep.
Councilwoman Jennings.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. On the recommendations page, there was a statement that says hire an outside firm for vehicle registration fraud. And I have a question. What do you consider the size of the problem to be in Hartford? And what would be the expected economic outcomes of actually bringing in an outside firm to identify vehicle registration fraud and follow up on it? Or is that what the purpose of that, that firm would be?
I think the problem is significant. I mean, if you compare just the number of our registered cars compared to our population and compare that to the other cities, we're way, way low as a percentage of cars to people. I think I did that exercise many months ago, and if my memory serves, we were in the high 30s, and the next closest was in the mid 50s in terms of percentage of registrations to population. And anecdotally, you know, I know there are lots of cars that are registered in neighboring towns that should be registered here, and we know that there's a firm in Maine that registers cars in Maine. We saw that on TV. So it is a significant problem. You know, in terms of revenue estimates, the first year, I don't think it's going to be huge. We estimated about $150,000. That was pretty close to Waterbury's experience, who's employed one of these firms for a number of years now. But I think the real payoff for that is to just get more compliance, and that will show up in grant list numbers.
The follow-up through you, Mr. Chair. I know Bridgeport has a program, and they just go and scan the license plate numbers in the large apartment buildings, and I guess after a few days, if your car has been parked there for a certain period of time, you get a tax bill from the city of Bridgeport.
Right.
So are we planning on doing something like that?
Yes. And so, and we wouldn't do anything without coming to you with a contract, but an RFP for that sort of service should be going out next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman McDonald. That'll be followed by Councilman Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you. A couple of questions on about slide 5. Looking at this transfer of position from tax collection to revenue management, why the difference in the numbers and the change numbers? That's way off. I mean, in terms of a position, are there additional charges being transferred to revenue management?
Nicole Plessy-Cloud, the treasurer, 30% of Ellen Tamar, 50% of OPEB, and Dahlia Jr. This one? Yeah. No, I don't know.
This is a new position.
Which line item are you looking at? The accounting and control, the revenue manager, or the tax collection?
General fund recommended budget, slide 5.
Right, which line?
Yeah, looking at the tax collection and revenue management.
Tax collection and revenue management.
Could you show, David, could you just show them the page?
Right, so with the existing employees in the department, there are some that have, as one of the earlier slides showed, a portion of them are grant funded, are grant funded and CIP funded. So we are moving, I believe it's admin resources between revenue management and tax collection to provide improved customer service. And depending on the allocation of the employee's salary between the general fund, grants, and CIP, the impact on one department or the other is not going to have the numbers be equal. Does that answer your question?
Sort of, but why would the allocation of the salary be different for a different department?
There, for example, in tax collection or in revenue management, there may be a position that is partially grant funded. It's grant funded for specific things, and moving that position to the tax collector's office, there isn't a grant funding there. And actually looking at the numbers, I think it's the other way around. But it's the makeup and how the position is allocated.
So then why transfer the position?
To improve efficiency in both departments and the service that are provided to the customers internally and externally, particularly with the tax collector's office.
Okay. And my other question on this slide is around the tax assessment and the cost of the revaluation. Could you walk us through how that $300,000 will be spent in this coming year?
We'll contract with a revaluation firm. I would imagine the whole contract will be in the $500,000 range, but much of the work will be done in the next fiscal year. We'd be mailing notices in November of 2016.
Okay, thank you. I have one other question around what's the timeline for making the Director of Finance permanent position?
We are continuing our national search for a finance director, as with our Public Works Director. We have had candidates for finance director that we were hopeful on that withdrew late in the process. Just as recent as, I believe, a couple of weeks ago, we have, through our consultant, our search firm, refreshed our ads and reposted. We're currently posting in a variety of annual conferences that are coming up. The National Forum for Black Public Administrators conference is soon. I'm not attending because I'll be here, but I believe it's next week. And at the end of next month, the National Governmental Finance Officers Association conference will be occurring. I'm sure Council is aware that as we approach November's election, there is, I believe in the charter, a prohibition against the mayor making appointments inside 90 days of the election. So essentially, once we get to August 1, we are going to continue to look, but we will not be able to make any appointments until after the election.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Cruz, followed by Councilman Witten.
Through the chair, I have just a couple questions. My first one is on page 18-2. Under the administration, one of the revenues is $57,143,652. I was trying to look in our revenues where that, just to give the details of where that revenue comes from in administration, which is very rare that you have $57 million under administration. That 18-2.
That's just pretty much the way that we account for it on our general ledger. When we're budgeting for these line items, we're budgeting for them under administration.
What is that again?
It's the way we account for them on our financial system. So we're just budgeting them under administration, all these big ticket items in the revenue budget. So the intergovernmental revenue, all that stuff is being budgeted under administration, under finance. If that makes sense.
Wouldn't that be broken down into the different divisions that generate that revenue? Or, I mean, I'm just, for other explanations, they're not placed under administration, they're placed on the division that creates that revenue. Yet here, it's actually placed under administration. And so when you go to the revenues under starting on 6-10, all the way to, I think, 15 or so, I'm trying to find where the breakdown of the 57 million.
We can get that breakdown for you if you like.
Okay, thank you. And my other question is, it was based on the presentation. It was actually page 19 on the presentation. It says Finance Department revenues by category continue. So I want to say this is the second page to that Finance Department revenues category. Under the other revenues, there's a statement or line that says $399,048 decrease in sale of city properties. Could you share information or the reasoning for the decrease?
Those numbers that are budgeted in that line item were provided by Development Services, so I think that would be a better question for them. But we can get you the backup for that line item if you like, that would detail the specific properties on that.
Mr. Chairman, I would add that year after year, depending on which properties are assumed to be sold and the value of the properties to be sold in any fiscal year, the ones that actually sell come off the list. The ones that do not sell, there may be an adjustment in the estimated sale price that would result in a decrease. I think the one that we're most familiar with is just across the street at 525 Main Street. But there are some properties that have or are in the process of being sold this fiscal year, so that's going to be a reduction for next year. And as Mr. Greco indicated, we'll provide the information for the support for the just over $3 million of other revenues.
If that could be a breakdown of the detail of the particular properties you're looking at, anticipating to have sold, and why there's that decrease, I think that would be greatly appreciated by the members.
Sure.
Councilman Cruz?
All set, thank you.
Councilman Wooden, followed by Councilman De Jesus.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'd like to start with the presentation, page 16. So the fines, forfeits, and penalties line decrease in 41,000. And so that's a decrease in false alarm citations and health sanitation citations. Then if we could go back to page 15, and I just want to confirm, any of those, are you trying to make up by the in-progress items and some of the new fees to make up for that decrease? Or
None of the in-progress items, there has been no revenue budgeted for those. Obviously, if between now and when we adopt a budget, those will be finalized, we can make changes. But there has been no revenue budgeted for those that are in progress.
Okay. And then with respect to, staying on 15, with respect to the Senior and Community Services, the relocation program, so just, and I have a vague recollection of this, having dealt with it at one point, the city is obligated to pay when the city relocates individuals out of a structure?
Excuse me, when the city is the cause for the relocation, yes. When there are fires and for example, license and inspection deems the structure uninhabitable, we do provide relocation assistance. We are endeavoring to do a better job of recouping those costs from the property owners. But yes, the city is responsible within some state statutes framework for what has to be provided. I will say that as there has been conversation about the city's relocation assistance in recent months, the city does go above and beyond what is required by state law.
Okay, and that above and beyond, can we legally recoup 100% of that amount from landlords?
I believe the state law speaks to what the requirement is for the property owner, and understand it is the property owner's responsibility. The city is merely stepping in the best interest of our residents, but the state law speaks to what we can attempt to recoup from the property owner.
Okay. And do you have an estimate of what these line items would generate?
No, I believe Mr. Greco indicated that the in-progress lines do not have revenue included in the recommended budget. It's not really significant dollars. I believe in the aggregate there's maybe $100,000 or so from all of those, with one caveat. The very first one for revised false alarm ordinance, this Monday when the public safety hearings are held. I believe each of the departments are going to speak to that false alarm ordinance and the burden that it provides on our staff and in turn our expenses. I believe there are thousands of hours that are lost, for lack of a better word, responding to false alarms. And we are in the process of drafting an ordinance with emergency services and telecommunication, the 911 shop, on point for that ordinance that we believe will provide two benefits. Some of it will be monetary in fines that are assessed against either the property owner or the alarm system provider. But I think what will outpace that is the freed up time when we're not having to respond to so many false alarms. I think that will be more valuable to us because our 911 operators, our police officers, and our firefighters will be able to do other things other than spend their time, our fuel, our wear and tear on equipment responding to repeated false alarms.
Okay. I guess that's an excellent point, because it sounds like they're not, once those items are all addressed, they're not significant revenue generators, but...
That's correct.
Okay.
I mean, we've got three main revenue sources: the real estate tax, personal property tax, and the car tax. All of the other, excuse me, I'm fighting a bit of a cold. All of the other revenues at the city are small in comparison to the smallest of those three majors. So while these are worthy and noble ways that are coming out of the Revenue Opportunities Committee, when you look at all of the things that were considered by the Revenue Opportunities Committee, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Greco, I think all of them together, if they were all done, might be $2 million or so. And I think that might be high. There were, and it was provided to the Restructuring Committee in a format that had projections or estimates of what the revenue generation might be for a particular line item, but there were several line items where we weren't able to arrive at an estimate. But when you add all of those ideas together, it does not make a meaningful impact on the needed revenue that the city needs to generate going forward.
Okay, and last question. On page 18, and this is the governor's proposed budget slide, can that be updated for us to include a line or a column that indicates the changes based on the General Assembly's actions out of appropriations and finance?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman DeJesus.
So, good evening again. My request is more towards the revenue. I would like to request a revenue detail budget. I want to be able to better understand the revenues. It'll be great if we can get, the same way we get the budget detail for expenditures, it'd be great if we could get a budget detail for revenue, so we can understand where the revenues are, and we can do that. If it's an Excel format, that would be best.
Pages 6-10 through 615, you'll find the detail for the revenue budget.
Right, I'm familiar with that page, but you said 5-10?
6-10.
6-10.
Shows
Can I
the
get that
revenue
in
budget by
Excel
receipt code.
format is what I'm asking for. Excel format, yeah.
Yes.
If I may, and I'm going to try to be incredibly fast, we are over, so I will be the last question on this particular department. And I'm going to try to put these in the form of budget questions. I'm going to ask the obvious question: have we considered a merger of both finance and M&B, and whether that would be appropriate, whether it saves any money or not? and I'm willing to take answers with respect in writing as to why that may not be the brightest idea. But I think it's a question we at least have and get from folks as to why there's a management and budget department and a finance department.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we all, as you're aware, we've discussed this at the restructuring committee, and I'm happy to put in writing my view of the pros and cons of changing the title of the two, well, the department and the office.
Really appreciate that. What questions were not? When we create the OPEC trust, which I know is something that this department and the Treasury have been involved in, and I'll ask it to you and then maybe the Treasury, are there any other potential savings that will be created, for example, to the Board of Education? And you can answer that in written form. In terms of if they're setting money aside in their budget for whatever their contributions are, I mean, does the OPEC trust lower lower their contributions, save them money when we create the trust, in addition to the other fund we've been discussed, but the benefits to them, and are they allocating that in their budget as well?
The benefits don't change if the other post-employment benefits are the other post-employment
benefit to their
benefits.
budget. Benefit to their budget.
The analysis from the actuary that the city and board have engaged demonstrates that depending on the assumptions that are made, the liability of the Board of Education for their other post-employment benefits ranges between just over 19 million and upwards of 28 million. Again, depending on the assumptions. What the mayor has included in his recommended budget is the assumptions based on the trust, the formal OPEB trust being created. The existence of a formal trust has the impact of lowering the liability, which is why we've included approximately $19.3 million of liability that the mayor is proposing to fully fund from that roughly $36 million of health benefits reserve that the board has built up over the past 5 fiscal years.
Yeah. I think the board is still allocated as if there wasn't a trust, but I need to look at their budget again more closely, and I'm just wondering if that's it's not a savings to us, but I mean if that's a duplicate funding within their own budget. But I'll wait,
Yeah, I think some of the history with regard to the board's evaluation of their OPEB liability is that over the years they've made adjustments to a variety of assumptions that have brought their liability down from the roughly $40 million range to the low 30s, into the 20s. It was in the upper 20s, then the lower 20s, and with the OPEB trust discussion of recent months, very recently we requested that the actuaries provide what that valuation would be after the formal trust is created. And that's the $19.3 million.
My other last is budget question. Have we looked at what we would gain if we had another person doing compliance with all the construction that's about to go on in the city of Hartford? We talked about bringing on the additional folks. If there's been any kind of cost-benefit analysis, don't need an answer, but if you could provide it in writing, if there's been any cost-benefit analysis of bringing on a person for the compliance for Hartford residents, and the contractual agreements that we're making with folks as to what they must provide.
Yes, I'll be brief in my response. You will see that the absolute last presentation on your schedule, that of the Chief Operating Officer, which is where the procurement division is included. We are making adjustments within the procurement division in an effort to improve our contract compliance.
My apologies, I've asked the question to the wrong department. Any other questions for this? Oh, I am the last question here for this department. I want to thank management and budget for their presentation. Up next, I'm going to bring the city treasurer in, and then we can, with the capital improvement fund, Adam may be able to, Mr. Cloud may be able to answer a lot of those questions that we do have with respect to the capital improvement fund. So bring the treasury on in early. And we'll pause this tape for purposes of recording. We'll take our quote-unquote commercial break. And we'll go right into the Office of the Treasurer.
We'll wait for you, right?
And we'll also, at the same time, if there's a presentation on the capital improvement budget,